Her aunt sold her with a broken loom and 3 chickens to a grain merchant. I'll write this as a man in his late 60s looking back, a grain merchant, scarred and solitary, who acquired a young woman through a transaction that shamed him even as he agreed to it, and how she, over time, became the thing that kept him alive when the sickness came for him. The voice dry, prairie-worn, self-aware without being soft. Non-linear circles back, hard micro-details throughout, the warm beat earned late. The loom was broke on one side. Anybody could see that. The aunt pointed to it like it was proof of something, like she was showing me the deed to good land instead of a frame with a cracked upright and a warp half-threaded. She had a way of presenting a thing that made you feel slow if you questioned it. The chickens were in a crate, 2 hens and a rooster. The rooster had 1 eye. I said the price she was asking was more than the sum of those parts, and she looked at me the way women of a certain age look at men who say true things out loud, like I had made a smell. The girl was standing at the edge of the yard, not watching us, watching the road south where the willows were. Her name was Calla. I don't know why I remember the rooster's eye before I remember her face. Memory's got no manners, it keeps what it keeps. I was 51 that spring. I say that not to explain myself, but because a man of 51 taking in a girl of 22, by the transaction I've described ought to be understood in his particulars before he's judged. I'd been alone 8 years. My wife Lyra died of the fever that took half the county the winter of '84, and I sold the north pasture to pay for her doctoring, and she died anyway, and I kept the grain business because there was nothing else to do with my hands. I had the house and the warehouse on the river road, and 2 men who worked the grain floor, and a dog that slept under the porch. I had a cough I'd had since the previous autumn that wasn't getting better, and a pain in my chest that I'd been ignoring the way a man ignores a sound in the wagon wheel when he's got 20 more miles to make. The aunt said Calla was strong and could cook and keep house and manage accounts. That last detail delivered with a kind of desperation that told me the girl's arithmetic was the best card she had to play. I'd had a housekeeper, Mrs. Polk, who'd gone back to Missouri to tend her own ailing sister, and the house had gone to a state of quiet ruin in her absence. I told myself that was the reason. The loom I said I didn't need. The chickens I said I'd take. The aunt said the loom came with. Calla rode back with me on the wagon without speaking for the first 12 miles. Not sullen, not frightened, or not showing it. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she watched the land go by like she was committing it to memory in case she needed to walk back through it someday. When we crossed the dry fork of the arroyo, she said, "Is your cough always that bad?" I said it was about usual. She said, "It sounds wet." I told her she'd get used to it. She said, "I'm not sure you will." First real thing she said to me. I didn't know what to do with it, so I didn't say anything. The rooster made a noise from the back of the wagon, and that was the end of that. I showed her the house. She walked through it room by room without comment, which I appreciated. Mrs. Polk would have cataloged every failure. Calla just opened windows. The loom I put in the back bedroom. She didn't thank me for it. I think she understood it was just easier than arguing with the aunt at a distance. Those first weeks were a study in a particular kind of quiet, 2 people sharing space at a respectful distance, like 2 animals that have agreed not to startle each other. She cooked. She kept accounts, and she was right about the arithmetic. She found 2 errors in my ledgers inside a week that had been costing me money I hadn't known I was losing. She told me about them flat and plain, the way you'd tell a man his barn door was unlatched, and I told her to fix them, and she did. She also watched me. Not in a way I could object to, but I felt it the way you feel being studied. She was tallying something, taking measure. I didn't ask of what. The cough got worse in late April. It had a sound in it by then I didn't care for. A settling sound, like water moving inside a thing that ought to be dry. I went to see Harbor, who was the nearest doctor, 30 miles south, and he put his ear to my back and his face went careful the way doctors' faces go when the news wants softening. He said there was something in the right lung. He said there were things we could try. He said the word consumption once, gently, and then seemed to decide not to say it again. I rode back in the dark, 30 miles of dark with that word in the wagon with me. By the time I got home, I had made a kind of settlement with it. You live long enough, you see enough men carried off by things they didn't invite. I'd had a good portion. I had the house and the river road and the business running clean. I'd loved one woman all the way and lost her, and that was a kind of completeness, even if it was a bitter one. I thought, I'll get my affairs in order. I'll sell the business to Tomlin, who's wanted it. I'll make it so nothing drags out. I put the horse up and went inside. Calla was at the table with the lamp on and the ledger open. It was past 10 o'clock. I said, "You should be in bed." She said, "What did Harbor say?" I hadn't told her where I was going. I stood there a moment thinking about how she'd known. I told her. She closed the ledger. Her hands stayed flat on it. She looked at the lamp, not at me, for long enough that I thought she was going to speak to it instead of me. Then she looked up. She said, "All right." Just that. I went to my room and I lay on the bed with my boots still on, and I thought about what all right could mean from a woman in her position. It might mean, all right, I accept this fact. It might mean, all right, I'll figure out where to go from here. It might mean nothing more than acknowledgement, the way you say all right when someone tells you the creek is running high and there's nothing to be done for it. I didn't sleep, but I didn't hear her crying through the wall either. In the morning, she had already made coffee, and she was grinding something in the small iron mortar, something dried and brown. And she told me without looking up that she'd learned certain things from a woman she'd known in the valley, a Tejano healer, and that she wasn't telling me they'd cure anything, but that she was going to give them to me in the coffee every morning, and I was going to drink it. I said I didn't know what she was grinding. She said, "I know you don't." I drank the coffee. What followed was 8 months I don't know quite how to account for. The illness moved the way bad things move, not in a straight line. There were weeks in May and June when the cough seemed to ease, and I could work a full day and almost believe Harbor had been hasty. There were days in July when I couldn't lift a grain sack, and the pain behind my ribs was a white specific thing that made thinking hard. I didn't go back to Harbor. I didn't see the point of having it narrated to me more precisely. Calla ran the house and the accounts. She started coming to the warehouse floor in the mornings and learned the business with the same flat attention she'd given the ledgers, watching, measuring, filing things away. The 2 men who worked for me, Dietz and a younger one called Pharaoh, took to her the way working men take to a competent person regardless of sex. She never talked more than the job required, and she made her requests plain. No one argued with her. I watched all this from a middle distance, still keeping that space between us, that agreement not to startle. But she was in the habit now in the evenings of sitting in the front room while I sat in the front room. Not together exactly. Her at the table with the mending or the weaving. She'd repaired the loom herself in the first month, traded some eggs and labor with a man down the road for the wood she needed, and me in the chair with a book I usually wasn't reading. The lamp between us. One night in August she said, without looking up from the loom, "Tell me about your wife." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because you talk about everything else in that house except her. And there's a coat in the back of the cedar chest that gets moved and refolded." I said I didn't know what that had to do with anything. She kept weaving. "It doesn't have to do with anything, I'm just asking." So I told her about Lyra, not the dying, the before, the way she laughed at things that weren't meant to be funny and made them funny, how she could read whether by some method she never adequately explained. The way she handled the first winter on the river road when everything froze and the fuel ran short, and she was madder about it than afraid of it, which made me the same way. Calla wove and listened. I talked longer than I'd intended to. When I finished, she said, "She sounds like she was good at staying." A beat, and then, "That matters more than most things." I sat with that a while. I said, "How old are you?" She said, 23 in September. I said, "You say old things for 23. She said, "I had an old life." I believed her. I'd seen enough of her not to question it. September the cough came back hard, 2 weeks in which I barely left the bedroom. Calla brought food and the morning coffee with whatever was in it and sat on the chair by the window and sometimes read aloud and sometimes just sat. I told her she didn't need to stay. She said, "I know." There was a night in the middle of that bad stretch when the pain was the worst it had been, and I said something I'd been keeping back, that she should write to her aunt or to wherever there might be someone for her, that this arrangement was going to resolve itself in a particular direction, and she ought to be thinking ahead. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I know what direction things go, Hendrik. I've known since April." She said my name the way you say a word you've been holding in your mouth a while. I'm not making plans to leave, so you can stop telling me to. I said I didn't want her to end up alone in a dead man's house. She said, I don't want you to give up, so there we are. She reached across and put her hand on the back of mine. Just that left it there. Her hand was calloused and warm, and the weight of it was nothing and everything. I didn't give up. October was a surprise. I don't know any other way to put it. The body does things that doctors can't always account for. Harbor, when I finally went back in November and let him listen to my back again, said there were things he couldn't explain and that he wasn't going to try. He said, keep doing what you're doing. He looked at me a little sideways when he said it, like he knew something had changed that he hadn't prescribed. I don't take credit for the not dying. I know what kept me fighting it. It was the weight of that hand. It was the coffee every morning. It was having something to get up for that wasn't just the settling of affairs. There's a thing that happens between two people who have been through a hard time together. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. You just look up one evening and realize the space between you has closed and neither of you moved to do it. It just went that way, the way a room warms when two people have been in it long enough. I don't know how to say what happened between me and Calla without sounding like I'm soft-pedaling it or inflating it. Neither one is honest. She chose to stay, she could have gone. She chose not to. When I was the worst version of myself, slow and sick and half convinced I was dragging her into the dark with me, she chose to stay. There's no word for what that means to a man, I don't think. Not one I know, you just carry it. In December, I asked her to marry me. I did it badly. I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, and she was at the window looking at the first snow of the year on the river road, and I said it without preamble, the way I'd always done things, flat and plain, and then I said, I know what I am, and I know what I'm not, and I know what this looks like, and I don't have any elegant way to say that I want you to choose this for real, and I want to be the man who earned that. She turned around from the window. She had a look on her face I'd seen before, that measuring look, the one from the first days on the wagon, tallying. Then she smiled. It was small and specific, that smile, not a performance. It went into her eyes and stayed. She said, I already chose. You just needed to ask. We married in January at the county seat with Dietz and a woman from town as our witnesses. Cold day. Blue sky the way February skies are blue, clear and absolute, and cold enough to hurt. Riding home, she put her arm through mine on the wagon seat and leaned a little, just a little. The way you lean into a wall, you know, will hold. I was not a young man. I was not a whole man. I had a bad lung and a dead wife in my past, and a business that ran on the bones of 8 years of solitary work. But I was the man she'd chosen, not the younger one in town who'd made his interest known the previous summer, not the one with the bigger spread north of the river. This one, the one with the cough and the grain warehouse and the one-eyed rooster. The snow on the flats was untouched. White out to the tree line, quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, that's the other kind, the kind that's got room in it. She was warm against my side. The horse knew the road. I let it find its own way home.